Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mustard Seed Podcast. I'm your host, Batayo Alofun. If you have been regular here on this series, thank you for staying loyal to this page. And if you've not subscribed to this channel for any reason, honestly, I don't know why you haven't, but can we just pause for a minute while you do that? I'm waiting. Okay. Thank you very much for doing that. And if this is your first time, you have a lot of catching up to do. But guess what? It's all available and it's all free. You can catch up with all the past episode and series at your convenience. But right now, it would be nice if you could just subscribe so that you don't get to miss anything as we go forward. Now, by way of introduction, I just want to say that Mustard Seed Podcast is that podcast where I share practical insights for practical life living, all from my everyday life experiences. And over the past couple of episodes, I've been discussing on a series that I've titled My Swimming School. It's basically a series of experiences that I have had taking my son for his swimming classes, essentially. And so today's episode is episode 4, and I've titled this The Teacher's Perspective. Anybody want to guess what this is going to be all about? So yeah, the results are in. It's the day my son goes to collect the result that will determine whether or not he's going to be moving on to the next class. And it's a very anxious moment. I look forward to it, and I want to share with you everything that happened on that day. I'll give you the full lowdown of all that gist after this break. Stay with me, don't go anywhere. So the results are in. Anyways, not so fast. So usually on the last day of every class, they will give you the result that will determine whether or not your child is going to move to the next class or has to repeat the class. I mean, I had a lot of hope. I know my son wasn't going to repeat the class. Duh. I'd been by the viewing center all the while. I've been watching him swim. I've seen him swim in a 12-foot pool. I know this guy. I've seen him move from the timid guy who doesn't know anything about swimming to this excellent swimmer, at least from my perspective. I don't know how to swim as well as he can right now. So as far as I'm concerned, he's an excellent swimmer. And I've seen him do this repeatedly. So really, I was looking forward. I kind of know what the result was going to be. But for the formality, we have to act surprised, right? So I was there. And interestingly, he had to finish the swimming class for that day, and at the end, then he get the report card. So he got the result, brought the result to me, and I just look at it. I mean, I kind of know what's there already, but just act surprised. But guess what? When I looked at the result, I didn't have to act surprised. I was actually surprised. Surprised because the teacher commented that my son had to repeat the class. And yeah, I was as surprised as you. Maybe a little bit more surprised than you. But I just couldn't let it go. The African parent in me will not let it go. So I took my son by the hand. I walked him back to the instructor, to go and fight for our rights. Solidarity forever. But when we got to the teacher, she calmly explained to me everything that has happened. And she explained to me how my son has been a very excellent swimmer. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that he needed to work on. He wasn't proficient in those things yet. And he just in good conscience couldn't give the authorization for my son to move to the next class. But that's not what I found the most amazing. I think what I found the most interesting was, as we're walking away, I mean, I kind of understand what the teacher was talking about, but she said something that was really, really interesting. She said, if you want, I could change it and ask him to move on to the next class. Said, but I'm worried that if he moves on to the next class, he's going to struggle, because the basics that he needs for that class, he needs to learn it in this class. Now, before I come back to that, I really need to emphasize the fact that something interesting was really going on here. I thought my son was an excellent swimmer, but the instructor had a different perspective, and her perspective were based on certain parameters that were very clear. Does he know how to do this? Does he know how to do this? Does he know how to do this? And it was different from my perspective as the sharing crowd, just looking at my son, and I thought that my son was an excellent swimmer. But here's where I'm going with all of this and how it relates to our spiritual growth, because most times we are celebrated for certain activities that have connotation of growth, but in the real sense, what is the perspective of the instructor? How is the teacher? How is God really seeing those activities? And there are so many of those activities that could fall into that category, but maybe we should just take one or two of those kind of activities that could fall into that category, that could be celebrated as symbolic of spiritual growth. But what if something else was going on that the instructor, the master, that God is not altogether pleased about? And while we may see it from the outside as a symbol of growth, God is saying, no, you are getting it all twisted. Let me give you an example, for instance. And if you have joined this episode over a period, part of the things I talked about as symbolic of growth is being able to give yourself onto prayer. And I talked about how your prayer life should grow, especially in length, not just in the quality of the praying, which is important, but also in the length of the conversation. For want of a better word, long prayers. But here is the problem, that there is a possibility that long prayer could become an activity done out of the flesh, an activity done on the basis of religion. In fact, I've seen people talk about long prayer as a basis of some sort of spiritual arrogance, some sort of spiritual pride, not to the point of encouraging other believers to step up in their walk, but to the point of proving to the other believer that they have transcend certain levels and certain realms, But as you begin to look at it, you begin to ask yourself, what does God feel? What is really God's perspective about this? What if God is just looking at God is saying, I know you are trying to talk to me for a longer period, but the motive for which you are trying to do this is altogether wrong. All right. So the motive for which we are doing the activities, those activities are symbolic of the progress we are making spiritually. But the motive for which we are doing them must also altogether align with God. God ultimately is the one who approves of of those activities as actually good and coming from the right place. Let me give you one more example. For instance, I have also talked about commitment in activities that you do either in ministry in the house of God, or your activities that you do in service of other believers. Now, I've also seen over the years that people actually give onto series of activities in the house of God, and you would have thought that those actions are indicative of their passion for God and their passion for the house of God. But I've seen different cases of people giving themselves onto those activities for all of the wrong reasons. For some, it's all about positioning. For some, it's all about positioning to even learn certain skill, so that once they become proficient in those skills, off they go out of the church. different people with different motivation. And for some, it's also they could be noticed and just so they could be able to occupy certain positions of privileges and honor within the local assembly. Whatever it is that is the motive of all of those things, the activity in itself is good. It is symbolic of our passion for God. If we claim to be passionate about God and about the things of God, then the passion for his house will consume us. We will not be comfortable coming to the church and doing nothing for God, right? But doing something for God must also come from a pure heart, right? And so when we look at people, there is this temptation to look at people after the flesh and just see the activities that they do and come to a conclusion that these are great people, spiritual people, and all of that. But ultimately, the person who decides the basis of those activities, the basis of those things that people do, as whether or not they are perfect, is God. Now, there is a very interesting scripture. This in Second Chronicles. In Second Chronicles, the Bible was very. The Bible tells us a very interesting story in Second Chronicles chapter 20. The Bible tells us this interesting story of this King Amaziah. And you could read that up, but I just want to refer to one statement in verse 2 of that Second Chronicles chapter 20, when the Bible summarized the reign of this guy. And it's sad because this guy reigned for well over 20 years, right? But the Bible says he did what is right. He did what is right, but not with a perfect heart. So I'm also asking you, the things that you are doing, the activities that you are doing for God, are they with perfect heart? But before we close out today, one other thing that I really want to be able to mention, or that I really want to emphasize a little bit, we'll probably talk about it more extensively in the next episode because of our time, is the last statement that the teacher made to me. And she said to me, look, if you want me to change this, I could do that right now, right here. And I could ask him to be promoted to the next class. But I said the fundamentals that he actually need to learn to be proficient in the next class, he need to learn it in this class. Now, that's just a reminder for us as well that sometimes in this our work, things might not, again, I'd mentioned this at some point to say, sometimes we will get it wrong. Sometimes it will not altogether be perfect. There would be those days where the flesh just get the best of us. All right. And God is saying, even in those moments, that it's okay. The fact that you fail doesn't mean you are a failure. You need to get up and take your stand again and continue to move. But I think more importantly is the fact that failure is not definite. The same way the teacher said about my son, he's an excellent swimmer. The fact that he's repeating this class is not going to change that. The fact that he's repeating this class only suggests that there are things that he needs to work on. All right. And that's why he's repeating this class. So yes, that was the story of the day of receiving the result. And it was all about perspective. I thought that he was a great swimmer, but that was just my perspective. And ultimately, my perspective wasn't that important in the matter. There is only one person whose perspective matters, and it was the instructor. As you live and walk with God as well, just bear this in mind. There is only one person whose perspective matters about how you live. It doesn't matter what you show off to people in the public. All that matters is the truth between you and God. So I ask you today, If God were to write a written assessment about you now, what would be his perspective? I know that we thought that you are this great brother, this holy brother, this prayerful brother, but what really is God's perspective of you? That is the most thing. And if anything, that is what you should work on the most. All right. So that will be all for today on this episode of Mustard Seed Podcast. It's been a very wonderful time. And I just want to encourage you that you take it one day at a time in your walk of growth. And remember that your most important audience is just one person, and that person is God. So that will be all for today. If today's episode has blessed you in any way, I would really appreciate it if you will share this episode with one person or 2 or 10, as many people as possible, that you feel they will really find strength in knowing that there is only one person whose opinion matters the most as far as their spiritual life is concerned. That person is God. So until I come your way again next week, remember, faith as small as mustard seed can move mountain. God bless you.